So this week we're going to be talking about tumbling, Philly. You've been tumbling oysters for like 6 or 7 years. What is oyster tumbling?
It's managing the oysters by sorting them, rattling them around, waking them up a little bit. It's good for shell strength, but I'd say the most important thing is just sorting them all by size. Because when they go back in the water, they're all the same size in a cage. They grow together more uniformly.
Have you ever worked oysters without a tumbler?
I don't think so. Since I started with you, I don't think we've never used a tumbler. Always used it. One tumbler or another, different brands.
How crucial is the tumbler to an operation?
Pretty crucial.
If you stick around till the end, I will show you something that has changed our lives. And I think Creighton, Phil, everybody would agree with me. We'll take our raw oysters that come out of the cages and they'll have squirts on them. You can see we're in a heavy mudded area, which actually really helps for biofouling, but you just got to touch your oysters more often. Put them through. It's really loud. That's why I don't have any going on right now. And God, that is the view that we work with, which is pretty amazing. And they will all come out clean, no squirts. My hand's the thing that's dirty. Nice market oysters. And these will go back into a cage for a few more weeks just to grow a little fin on them for shelf life. So some of these oysters are markets. That's a market size oyster. But with the chips in it, we know that we need to keep it in there for about 2 more weeks just to create a little seal of new growth. And that extends the shelf life immensely. So we try and do that. Every week we'll be posting our new subject that we're going to be talking about in the upcoming YouTube video. So this week we asked if anybody had any questions about tumblers, and I got a few questions from some other awesome oyster farms. I got my buddy Thomas. Question is, how frequent do y'all tumble, the speed and the density settings? So tumbling, our oysters come to us in a very tiny little seed. That's a 2 millimeter seed. These oysters all grow at different rates, and they grow just like humans. Some grow fast, some grow slow. The same can be said about oysters. So, as these oysters sit in these bags, they're feeding at different rates. And you've got your fast growers and your slow growers. And with your fast growers right next to your slow growers, they're going to be a bigger size oyster next to a smaller size oyster. And I've heard that they can take more of the food from the smaller oysters. What we want to do is we want to get them all with their size. Tumbling serves 2 purposes. One of those purposes is to get the small oysters with the small oysters and the large oysters with the large oysters. We've got different tube sizes that we can attach to the tumbler in order to do that. Now, little tip, if you're sorting smaller seed, you're going to want to go on a slower rotation. That's more delicate on the seed. It gives more time for the small seed to get better sorted through the holes. If I speed that tumbler all the way up, the rotation will actually prevent some of the oysters that should be going through smaller holes because of just the centrifugal force kind of keeping them through the tumbler. So that brings me into my second reason. The first reason is to sort them out by size. The second is to shape the oyster. Now an oyster, if you look down at your finger and you see your fingernail, an oyster grows essentially the same way. Small layers of calcium, the oyster opens up, and then small layers of calcium grow around the edges as it filters, and as it closes, the calcium layers get thicker and thicker, and that's how the oyster shell grows. So if you're not in a high activity area, like with our bottom cages, they'll sit on the bottom. They can sit in a weird position and the oyster will grow out maybe from the side or too far from the top. And if you can get that soon enough, put it through the tumbler, you can knock off that thinner fin and it will promote a more uniform shape. Now I was mentioning the speed of when you have larger oysters, sometimes you're not so concerned about actually sorting them by size, and they might already have come through the end of the tube. They could be sitting in a pre-market or market cage and they just need a little bit more time. Well, spring growth came and now they're all funky and misshapen. So just one way to utilize that tumbler is you put on the correct tube size, assuming they're all large, put in the large tube, turn the tumbler up all the way and push them through. Now what that'll do is you'll put a lot in there so you're not really concerned about them trying to get through the holes. The more you put through, it's kind of like a rock tumbling machine, and the oysters become the other rocks, and they polish each other almost as they're banging through the tumbler. They'll all come out the other end. So also with these oyster tumblers, there's the ability to put a wash tube or some sort of water pump connected to it. We've done it both with and without the water pump, and if you have the ability to, I would recommend it. It just cleans the oysters, and what you're actually cleaning is not the outside shell of the oyster, you're cleaning the lip of the oyster. So if mud or caught or debris gets in the way of that oyster's calcium growth, it will make the shell funky. But when you wash it, it kind of cleans out all the edges of the oyster, and it promotes extremely uniform growth. Once it's clean, you just have this perfect uniform growth around the edges. So how frequently do we tumble? That's a great question. The answer is it changes to do with the seasons. And ultimately, it actually changes to do with the sun. The sun actually gives most of its energy to the planet is through phytoplanktons. And oysters feed off those plankton and the small food, the algae. So during different times of the year, we have different sun, and that means that there's different amounts of food in the water. Now you're like, why is food important for tumbling? So food is important for how quickly the oyster will regenerate after it's been tumbled. What do you think about wintertime tumbling?
I guess it just depends on where you're at in the world. Sometimes it's warmer in certain places. If the water temperature is warm enough, it's safe to tumble them and put them back if they're big enough. Sometimes the oysters are just big enough. The larger they are, the safer it is, I'd say.
That's a good point. So what is the potential harm in tumbling them during the winter time? Why is that not a good thing?
Because there's not as much growth when it gets colder, when the water temperature gets colder. Water in the wintertime is one reason why you want to be careful about tumbling your oysters. And also, if they get chipped with less food, they might not heal properly.
So they won't be able to close when completely with that chip.
Mm-hmm, right.
Nice.
The seal might be broken.
Nice. What's your favorite? Do you like tumbling duty or do you like unclipping better?
I like both. A weight lift workout when you're tumbling because you got to throw them up in the hopper.
Right.
But if you're feeling tired, I guess unclipping can be an easier job.
Right.
It's all hard in the end.
So 6 weeks is going to be our most common or our quickest frequency of tumbling. Now, when the water slows down with food, we can push that back to 12 weeks on a schedule, or we can push that back even to 3 months. Right now, there's some stuff that we put in December that we probably will not be touching until March to tumble, and that is perfectly okay. When you get started, I had this happen to me. I was just super eager to tumble, and oftentimes with oyster farming, you feel like if you're physically working, you're being productive, but that is not the case. It is possible to over tumble your oysters, and that will slow down the growth, which will cost you labor. It'll cost you time of your cage being used because it's going to take oysters to grow longer. And you're also probably missing out on something else you could be doing during the tumbling time that you're using. And then when we're talking density settings, I'm assuming how quickly are we pushing them through the tumbler? Now, that's all for us based on the tides. If the tides are up and we've got the time and we need them to be sorted a little extra special and they're smaller stuff, we'll do it slowly. It is a piece of equipment that we're looking into. We just don't have the space for it yet. We're trying to build this out efficiently, and it's just we don't have the space. It is an upfeed conveyor, can turn up and down, and that will save labor instead of us just pushing it through. The one thing I do like about being able to push it through by hand is if I am ever in a situation where the tide is coming down, I can go full bore. If I'm just looking for polishing and just really looking to get some stuff cleaned up about a month before it's going to get sold, we will go out and take markets, and I will just push them through as fast as humanly possible. And I think I could do that around the conveyor, possibly, but the way we've got it set up right now, I can push a lot through. So the second question comes from Sam down at Sharkbite Oyster Company. Does a larger diameter tube and higher speed clean off the barnacles, spat, and general fouling? So that is a great question. Fouling maintenance and fouling control is a huge cost to labor in the oyster farming industry. And one method to help clean and polish off your oysters, as we were mentioning, is using the tumbler. Tumbler is a great tool, and it'll work for getting off specific types of fouling. But what we found is that you have to get that fouling when it is extremely small. The tumbler, it won't do it. And it's The fouled stuff will actually mess up your sorting because it creates a different diameter on the oyster, and you've just got a whole problem. Fouling keeps me up at night. Let's see. The speed and the tube size. Yes, you can get the fouling, but you've got to get it early. You've got to get this stuff when it is 2 millimeters on there, when you can barely see it. Put it through the tumbler. I would offer the alternative of air drying. Would be a much less laborious way to deal with fouling. I don't think that you can use a tumbler to deal with fouling now that I think about it. Tumbling is not a mitigator for fouling at all. If you get them soon enough, it might knock off some of that. But from my experience, we have not had the ability to use this for anti-fouling.
This right here, believe it or not, is actually a sorter in itself for seed. This is the first level. So what you do is you pour your seed out of your bags, shake, 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 whatever stays. And that's actually one of the ways when you get started if you don't have a tumbler to tumble. Short seed shaker sorter. And believe it or not, that does tumble them. It breaks off the lip. It's just applying energy to them. So that's the manual tumbler. All right, here's another tumbler that we used. Now this tumbler was a great tumbler. It still is. So this is a tumbler we got from Shell Game out of Florida. He's a welder, and he was looking at the tumblers and he thought he'd make his own, and it was affordable, and here's another thing about this bad boy. This tumbler, it's light. So what we would do is we would actually take this tumbler and we would put it on the boat, and that way we were able to tumble on the river. Just very basic. I know this is a little rusted out, but this is extremely easy to replace on Amazon, super cheap. That is one thing I like about this tumbler, is that I pretty much think I can fix everything that could go wrong with it. But yeah, super basic concept. This one does not have a wash tube. I do believe he's added a wash tube to it, but this thing was great. And as soon as we need a second tumbler, this guy will be back online. So this is what I would say is the second tier. So you got hand-shaken tumbler that tumbles them and sorts them. This is the medium. There is ways to make your own tumbler, and I've seen them, but you do want some rigidity to it and some durability. And I think this is about as minimum as I would go, knowing the type of abuse that these things are going to go through.
Alrighty, well, if you stuck around to the end of the video, I got a secret for you. And it's this little guy right here. This is a lifesaver for us. Now, what this is just a Max cart, but it is essentially an electronic cart. This quick. But this right here has saved our backs so much. This is light enough to go down a dock. This also pretty much takes 0-degree turns. I wouldn't farm without it. I would put it right up there next to the tumbler. It's a long game, trying to keep your back safe. And this right here, I think it was $2,400. Just a Max 1000. This one carries 1,100 pounds. We can safely fit about 40 bags in there. Once you have one, you'll never go back. So that's Oyster Tumbling 101. I appreciate your time. And I would like to leave y'all with a little quote. I love quotes. Attitude, not aptitude, determines altitude. Zig Ziglar, attitude is everything. Keep smiling, scuttlers.
Guilty pleasure has a bitter taste. In the end, my friend, are you sure you wanna fight?